It's crazy how, like, one single statement can just cause a firestorm online. We're talking about that whole thing with the Uniqlo CEO and, well, him saying they don't use any cotton from Xinjiang.
Yeah.
It didn't exactly go smoothly in China, did it? But honestly, this whole thing is way bigger than, like, one company or one statement. Like, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we're going to really, like, dive deep into this world of Xinjiang cotton
Yeah.
and how it's still ending up in our clothes, even when brands are saying, nope, not using it.
It's like this big fashion mystery, isn't it?
Totally.
What's so interesting is how, like, these global supply chains are just so tangled. Like, seriously,
Yeah.
trying to trace where stuff really comes from. It's crazy difficult.
Absolutely. So to guide us today, we've got this FinShots article. It's called How Xinjiang Cotton Still Haunts the Fashion Industry.
Right?
And it came out like just a few days ago, December 2nd.
Okay.
And get this, they're saying tests are finding that almost 20% of the clothing from major retailers, it still has Xinjiang cotton in it. Even when those brands are saying they don't use it.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I was like genuinely shocked by that.
Yeah, to really wrap your head around all of this, I think it helps to kind of rewind a bit.
Oh.
Like, think back, so Xinjiang, this region in China,
Mm-hmm.
it was a major player, like a huge deal in the global cotton industry.
Okay.
We're talking like 85% of China's cotton came from there.
Wow.
And get this, 25% of the world's supply. So that's a quarter of all the cotton on the planet.
That's a lot of cotton.
It is. But then in 2021, there were these really disturbing reports that came out
Right.
about forced labor and human rights violations, all involving the Uyghur population,
Yeah.
a Muslim minority group in China.
It was like a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely.
Like suddenly the clothes we wear, the comfy clothes, they took on this whole new meaning.
Definitely.
And you had all these brands, H&M, Adidas, Nike,
Mhm.
even luxury brands like Burberry. They all came out and publicly said, we are not using Xinjiang cotton anymore.
Yeah.
And then, the U.S. stepped in and they passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act,
Yeah.
which basically banned any imports that were linked to Xinjiang. So you'd think that would, like, solve the problem, right?
You would hope so. But it's actually not that simple.
Yeah.
This is where things get tricky. Like, China completely denies these allegations, right? They call it, Western propaganda.
Right.
And they actually encouraged these boycotts against any brands that were saying no to Xinjiang cotton.
So these brands were, like, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like if they speak out against forced labor, then they risk losing this huge market like China.
Mm-hmm.
But if they stay silent, then they're facing criticism in the West.
Yeah.
Talk about a lose-lose situation.
Totally a lose-lose. And Uniqlo's whole attempt to, like, stay neutral kind of backfired.
It did.
Wouldn't you say? I mean, their CEO's recent statement, like, it was intended to kind of calm things down with Chinese consumers.
Yeah.
But it actually ended up, like, making people ask even more questions.
Yeah, it's like it was like an unintentional confession almost.
Right.
Like, oh, so you are worried about using cotton from Xinjiang.
Yeah.
But here's what gets me, like, even if brands are actively trying to avoid it,
Mm-hmm.
they're still getting caught using it.
Mm.
So, like, how deep does this really go? The article, it talked about this loophole, right?
Yes.
Something about, I think it was small shipments.
Yeah, there was something called the de minimis rule. So basically, they could sneak in these small packages under the radar, bypassing all the usual customs checks. But then the UFLPA came along, closed that loophole.
Okay.
But it's, like when you push on one part of a balloon, the problem just kind of pops up somewhere else.
Right. So we've got brands caught in this really tricky spot, and we've got these loopholes closing, but then new ones are opening up. This whole thing's starting to feel like one of those escape rooms.
Yeah, totally.
Where you've got a puzzle inside a puzzle inside a puzzle.
Oh, I hate those.
Me too.
It's so frustrating.
But where does Uniqlo's supplier fit into all of this? Lutai Textile, I think it was.
Right.
The article really seemed to focus on them quite a bit.
Yeah, Lutai, they're a really interesting case study because up until 2019,
Okay.
they were actually very open, very upfront about sourcing their cotton only from Xinjiang.
Huh.
But then when the controversy exploded,
Yeah.
they went completely silent about where their cotton was coming from.
So it's like they went from shouting it from the rooftops
Right.
to suddenly, like, whispering behind closed doors.
Exactly, exactly.
Which seems a bit suspicious, right?
Well, yeah, it does raise some questions.
Especially since, like, they were still getting government subsidies for shipping cotton out of Xinjiang, even after they went all quiet.
Yeah, it does make you wonder.
And this is where I think the whole thing gets even more complex.
It really does. Like, even if companies stop sourcing directly from Xinjiang, they could be using these intermediary countries to make it harder to trace,
like muddy the waters.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of shipping cotton straight from Xinjiang to, let's say, the U.S., they might route it through, like Bangladesh or Vietnam first.
Yeah.
And they'll mix it with local cotton, so it's harder to tell where it really came from. And then, since the final product only lists, like, that intermediary country as the source, it becomes nearly impossible to know where the cotton actually originated.
Like, yeah, a total shell game.
Right.
Except the stakes are so much higher.
That's kind of terrifying. It feels like no matter how much we try to be informed consumers, the system is working against us.
It is.
It's like they're saying good luck figuring this out.
Pretty much.
You did mention, though, that Lutai's latest report, they're claiming that they're sourcing overseas now.
Yeah, they are.
So is that a sign that things are changing?
Or is it just another layer of, like, hiding the truth?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
It does seem to match up with this trend we're seeing.
Okay.
Where China seems to be using more of that Xinjiang cotton for their own domestic industry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But that just brings up a whole new set of questions, doesn't it?
Right. Like, even if they're not shipping it directly to us.
Yeah.
What about the clothes we buy from brands that manufacture in China?
Right.
How can we know what's going on in those supply chains?
It's a really valid concern.
Yeah.
And it highlights how little transparency there is.
Yeah.
Like, that's really at the heart of all of this.
And that's just the beginning, right?
It is.
Like the tip of the iceberg.
Definitely.
When we come back, we're going to dive even deeper into what all of this means and what it means for you as a consumer. So stay with us. I mean, it really feels like we've kind of uncovered this whole ethical maze when it comes to, like, where our clothes come from. We've got this evidence of forced labor on one hand, and then, like, this whole tangled web of hidden information on the other.
It's a huge ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
It really is.
It makes you think, like, how can we even as consumers make responsible choices when the information is so hard to find?
Yeah, it feels almost impossible, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can try to do your research, check labels, maybe buy less fast fashion, but if the system itself is kind of designed to keep us in the dark, like, how much of a difference can we really make?
That's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
Like, it feels kind of hopeless almost.
Yeah, it's true. Like, individual actions, they might not completely solve everything,
Right.
but they're still important, right? It's still part of the solution. I think the bigger need is, like, systemic change.
Okay.
You know, more transparency from brands, stricter regulations, maybe even, like, rethinking this whole fast fashion model we have.
It makes you, remember back when clothes were, like, actually made to last?
Oh,
Like, people used to repair things.
totally.
Instead of just tossing them out after, like, a few wears.
Right.
Maybe that's part of the solution too. Like, focusing on quality, buying less.
Yeah.
Choosing well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a growing movement towards sustainable and ethical fashion, which is really encouraging.
Yeah.
But it's still just a small part of the overall industry.
Right.
To really see change, I think the big brands, they need to step up and take some responsibility.
And that's kind of brings us back to Uniqlo, right?
Yeah.
Like, whether they meant to or not, that CEO's statement, it started a conversation that we needed to have.
They really did.
It forced people to kind of face the possibility that even brands they thought were ethical could be involved in this.
Yeah, and it also shows how much, consumer pressure matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about the backlash that Uniqlo faced in China, even though it was, like, based on a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
It proves that these brands, they care what people think. Like, imagine if consumers in the West were just as vocal about demanding transparency and ethical sourcing.
Right. Like, it feels like we're constantly bombarded with so much information.
Oh, yeah.
About so many different problems that it's easy to just kind of feel numb to it all.
Yeah, totally.
But maybe this whole Uniqlo situation, maybe this is like the wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is when consumers say, like, enough is enough.
I agree. We need to, like, demand more from the brands we support.
Yeah.
Hold them accountable for their entire supply chain, not just the final product.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, like, put our money where our values are.
But how do we even like start doing that
Yeah.
when the system feels so like deliberately opaque.
Yeah.
Like even experts like you are working so hard to like unravel this whole web of suppliers and middlemen. Like
Right.
what hope does the average person have?
It's a really valid point.
Yeah.
And that's where things get like really complicated. But there are resources out there, like organizations like the Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Lugar region. They're doing incredible work.
Okay.
Tracing supply chains and exposing the companies that are complicit in these abuses.
Okay, so we don't need to become like supply chain experts ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
But we should be like supporting the groups that are already doing that work.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And there are also tools like the Good On You app, which rates brands
Oh yeah.
based on their ethical and sustainability practices. It's not perfect,
Right.
but it's a really great starting point for making better choices.
Okay. And we'll make sure to link to those resources in the show notes so everyone can, check them out, learn more, get involved.
Perfect.
Because you know what they say, knowledge is power, right?
It is.
The more we know about where our clothes come from, the better equipped we are to make ethical choices.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Making choices that reflect our values.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be easy. It might take some effort, but it's an important step towards a more just and sustainable fashion industry.
It's not about, like, being perfect.
Right.
It's about making progress.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, each step we take,
Mm-hmm.
every informed choice we make, it all contributes to this larger movement
Yeah.
towards a more ethical and sustainable fashion industry.
It's interesting how we started by talking about Uniqlo and that CEO's statement.
Yeah.
But this conversation has become so much bigger than just one brand.
It has. It really has. This isn't just about Uniqlo or even just cotton.
Mm.
It's about the whole fashion industry and how we really need more transparency and more ethical practices.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how effective are boycotts really?
Mm.
Or these big corporate statements when the system itself is just like built on this lack of transparency.
That is a great point. Like consumer pressure, it can definitely, sway brands to a certain extent. But we need stronger systems in place to make sure they're actually accountable.
Okay.
Like we need regulations that actually have some teeth and can enforce ethical sourcing.
Maybe we even need to like rethink our whole relationship with fast fashion.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the sheer amount of clothing that's produced and consumed,
Yeah.
it's unsustainable,
Yeah.
both environmentally and from a human rights perspective. It's like we've become like addicted to cheap clothes and we're kind of choosing to ignore the real cost.
But what's the alternative? Like,
Right.
Are we all supposed to start like wearing hemp sacks and living off the grid?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
It's about finding a balance.
Okay.
Being more mindful of our consumption habits, choosing quality over quantity,
Right.
supporting those brands that are actually prioritizing ethical practices,
Yes.
and advocating for those systemic changes that we were talking about.
So it's not about like achieving some perfect ideal. It's about continuing to move forward.
Absolutely. Every conscious choice that we make, it all contributes to a larger movement towards a more ethical and sustainable fashion industry.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive
Mm-hmm.
into this really tangled world of Xinjiang cotton.
Yeah, it's a tangled web for sure.
It is. This conversation has left me feeling, I don't know, like a mix of anger at the injustices, sadness for the victims, just like frustration
I know.
at how complex this problem is, and also like a sense of responsibility to try and make a difference.
I share those feelings.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by how big this is.
Yeah.
But I find hope in knowing that more and more people are like becoming aware of these issues and they're demanding change.
And that's where you come in, dear listener.
Exactly.
We've given you a lot to think about today, right?
We have.
We've exposed some of the really dark realities of the fashion industry. But we've also like highlighted how much power you have as a consumer.
Yes.
Like your choices, they have an impact.
They do.
And you can make a difference.
Absolutely. Your choices matter.
Yeah.
Your voice matters. And your actions, even if they seem small, they all contribute to a more just and sustainable world.
So as you go about your day, as you get dressed, as you shop for clothes, just remember this conversation.
Right.
Remember the human cost of cheap fashion. And ask yourself, like, What steps can I take to become a more conscious consumer?
And if you're looking for, resources, organizations to support, even just like more information, we've got you covered. We're going to include a bunch of helpful links in the show notes.
Perfect.
Awesome.
So until next time, stay curious.
Stay informed.
Stay engaged.
Yes.
Because the world needs more people who care, who question, and who are willing to make a difference.
Couldn't agree more.
It really makes you think about like my own closet.
Yeah.
Like how much of the stuff that I have could be, tied to Xinjiang cotton, even if it's like indirectly.
It's a question a lot of people are asking. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not easy to tell, especially with, everything we've talked about, the lack of transparency.
Yeah, it makes you kind of appreciate those brands that are like really committed to doing things ethically.
Yeah.
The ones that are really going above and beyond to make sure that their supply chains are clean.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe that's where we need to like shift our focus as consumers and start like actively supporting those brands more.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yep.
Choosing to support companies that, their values align with yours.
Yeah.
It's a powerful way to actually make change happen.
Right.
It sends a message to the whole industry that, like, we care about this stuff.
It does. And speaking of sending a message, it makes you wonder, like, how effective are boycotts really?
Yeah.
In a situation like this. I mean, we saw how fast brands backtracked when they faced that backlash in China. But is that enough to like create real lasting change?
It's tough to say.
Yeah.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Boycotts, they can definitely like put pressure on brands, raise awareness, but they don't always get to like the root of the problem.
Right. Yeah. It feels like we need like bigger solutions.
Yeah.
Like more systemic solutions, things like stricter regulations, making sure ethical sourcing is happening.
Yeah.
Like maybe we even need laws that require brands to be more transparent.
Absolutely.
About where their supply chains are coming from.
Those are all important steps.
Yeah.
And consumers can play a role here too.
Okay.
Like advocating for those changes, contacting, elected officials,
right,
supporting organizations that are pushing for more accountability from the fashion industry.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not just about like changing our own shopping habits. It's about like changing the whole system.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We need to create a system where ethical and sustainable practices are like the default, not the exception.
This whole conversation is really like opened my eyes to how much power we have as consumers, but also how hard it is to make those informed choices.
Yeah.
In a system that sometimes feels like it's like deliberately trying to confuse us.
Yeah, I know. It can be overwhelming.
It is overwhelming.
It really is.
So what can our listeners do like right now, today, to start making a difference?
I would say start by doing your research.
Okay.
We're going to include some really helpful resources in the show notes, like, the Good On You app we mentioned earlier, and organizations like the Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Uyghur region.
And don't be afraid to like reach out to brands directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ask them about their sourcing practices.
Yes.
Let them know that you care about this stuff and you're looking for transparency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, every time you buy something, it's like a vote.
Yeah.
So choose to support the brands that are, committed to doing things the right way, ethically, sustainably. Even small changes in our buying habits, they can have a big impact over time.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress.
Exactly.
Like we talked about before.
It is. And ultimately, it's about recognizing that the clothes that we wear, they're more than just pieces of fabric.
Yeah.
They represent choices and values and impacts that go way beyond just ourselves.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well said. This has been a really, really eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
And I hope our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of, how complex this Xinjiang cotton issue is.
Yeah.
But also how much power they have to make a difference.
I hope so, too. It's a conversation that needs to keep going.
It does.
And I encourage everyone to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking the tough questions.
Yeah, because the more we know, the better choices we can make. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll catch you next time.